we've talked about plenty of gaming companies on the channel, but we've never actually discussed a really big one, and that is Sony. And not only is it a gaming company, and of course I do think that gaming has a big part of Sony's future, but in fact Sony is a huge conglomerate when it comes to electronics. And today we're going to be talking about where I think Sony stock could possibly go, and we're going to talk about exactly why I think that this stock has a lot of potential in the short, medium, and even long term as well. So without any further ado, let's dive into Sony stock. Let's go. Alright, so I'm going to try and zoom through this presentation as fast as I possibly can while giving you guys the most amount of value in a short period of time. If there's anything that I missed about Sony stock during this, make sure to leave it down in the comment section below. And if there's a company that maybe you'd like me to compare Sony to, I'm more than happy to do that as well. So first, let's talk about the Sony products and the fact that there's absolutely an insane amount. When you Google Sony products, this is the list that you get. And this is just a small fraction of what they actually bring to the table. As you probably know, a big reason why we're talking about it is because the PlayStation 5 is a big part of their product line, but so far has been one of the least selling products during their lifeline. And we're going to talk about that as well, because I think you guys are going to find that absolutely stunning when we talk about the amount of products that they've sold in the past comparative to their hottest product, which I think right now is the PlayStation 5. So let's talk about the stock itself. So Sony's ticker symbol is just Sony, S-O-N-Y, and it's listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And when we look at the stock price at the max chart, we can see that they've been as high as $150 back during the dot-com bubble. Now we're sitting at $110. So if you bought this 20 years ago, you'd still be in the negative, which is absolutely crazy. But at the same time, if you just bought this about 8 to 9 years ago during the 2012 low point of Sony's history, you'd be sitting at over 11x from your initial investment. So timing in this particular stock was very important during its entire lifespan. So now that you have a little bit of a visualization of what this stock has done in the past, we're gonna go ahead. Oh, there you have Lenny jumping on the counter there. But let me move him for a second. And when we look at the revenue, they're pulling in around $81 billion per year moving forward. Obviously, this is going up and up and up, and we're going to talk about that as well. But next, let's look at their balance sheet. When you seek to understand a company, balance sheets are really important. Now, of course, this isn't in US dollars, this is in Japanese yen. So you want to make sure that you're not looking at this and being like, holy crap. But no worries, what we really want to focus on here is their balance sheet. Their balance sheet shows that they're sitting on mostly long-term investments and other assets. They have some liabilities, they have receivables, physical assets, and they have a little bit of debt. I wouldn't consider this a lot of debt for the size of the company that they are, and I don't see this affecting their long-term prospectus at all. I think that'll do just fine even if they have this debt weighing them down a little bit. If anything, I just see this as a potential for them to not have to use their own money in order to grow their bottom line. And because of the relationships that they've built over the years with big banks, they could probably borrow a lot more money and still be just fine going forward. So I want to look at the quarterly financials, and we want to make sure that these are going up year over year. As you can see, in September of 2020, we had a $2.11 trillion revenue. Again, this is in Japanese yen, so remember to convert it. But the biggest thing that we want to see is their revenue or net income going up. And obviously, we did have a shortage in chips, so we did have a drop in sales. But looking at December 2020, we did have an increase in revenue, and we also had an increase in net income when we're talking about year over year. Now, when we look at March 2021, we saw a decrease in revenue from quarter over quarter, but year over year, again, 26%, and net income 700% year over year. March of 2020, they had a pretty rough quarter. Now, June 2021, that's the one that was most recently reported on, but they do have one coming up soon, and I'll share with you the date on that as well to pay attention to. But the revenue here was 2.26 trillion, again 14% increase, looks good. And then net income 211 billion, again up 10% year over year. They had a pretty scrappy 2019 and 2020, so this actually looks good because that means they're recovering and making up those lost sales now. And there's no wonder why the stock has gone up since then. And obviously this does have something to do with the PS5 shortages, but as this article points to the fact that the PS5 shortage might be over soon as Sony secures more chips. That's really good to see, because honestly, I know so many people that have been waiting for the PS5 to actually come into stores and then being able to pay a fair and reasonable price for this console. And we're going to talk about exactly how many they've sold, and I think this is going to blow your mind, but we have the PlayStation 2 with 157 million units sold. This is all of Sony's video game consoles lined up next to other big companies like Nintendo and Microsoft as well. So you have PlayStation 2 at the top, like I said before, Nintendo, which I personally thought was one of the most popular consoles from the get, Game Boy, PlayStation PlayStation 4, PlayStation, then we have the Wii, Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 3, and going down the list, as you can see, these are in millions, and as you go down and down the list, you slowly start to see that we're starting to dwindle, and yet the bottom one is GameCube at 21 million, and PlayStation 5 is nowhere to be seen. And of course, that is part due to the global shortage. But how many consoles did they actually sell, and what is their potential? Well, if we look back, PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 4 sold anywhere from 116 million to 157 million, and I think this one is even more anticipated than that. And how many they sold so far? Well, that is currently sitting at around 10 million units. Again, this article was posted in July of 28, but we haven't had a lot of launches since then, so I could see this being about 12, maybe 15 million units so far. But that means we still have a 10x in consoles to be sold, and that's not even including the money that they're going to make from the games or the passes that these consoles need in order for you to play games, right? So that is something that's very, very interesting, and that's going to really paint a good picture for their stock price over the next couple of quarters and maybe even a couple years from now. If you were curious, well, what are their biggest sectors? Well, here you go. In revenue in billions, you see on the left, and then each year at the bottom here, you can see that the electronics products and solutions is one of their biggest sellers, and the biggest carrier of their revenue is game and network services, which again, this year has outperformed every year in the past. The closest one was 2018, and even that got outbeat by over $5 billion in revenue, and we still haven't seen the PlayStation 5 sell anywhere near to its predecessor. So we have a huge amount of revenue that's still yet to be brought in by Sony. So we're gonna have to keep our eyes on that. And honestly, I'm super excited by the console, and I definitely know I'm not the only one in those shoes, and I think that this console has the potential to outbeat every other console in the past, strictly because of the shortage and people wanting it that much more because they can't get their hands on it. So that'll be really interesting to see when it's been a year or two in the process. So let's talk about their long-term growth potential and profits, and here's a little snippet of an article that I found that I think you guys might enjoy. It says that profits at each of Sony's core business should continue to grow at above GDP levels for the foreseeable future. Video game spending is growing at a mid-single-digit rate globally, and profits continue to expand for game and console makers as spending has shifted from lower margin physical games to higher margin downloadable content and subscription services. So not only are they going to make so much more on the consoles like mentioned earlier, but they're also monetizing so much more than in the past through downloadable content and their subscription platform. So that's another thing to just pay attention to as we go into this next quarter, but more importantly, into the next couple of years, because consoles and memberships have a much longer life cycle than they did back in the day. Back in the day, consoles were coming out every 2, 3, maybe 4 years. Now, companies are willing to wait up to 5, maybe even 6 years to launch a good, reputable console, especially when we're talking about Sony, cough, cough, Microsoft, cough, cough. And that is part due to the fact that the consoles themselves want the video game manufacturers to catch up to the innovation that they're building on. If they were to upgrade every single year or every 2 years, game manufacturers wouldn't be able to keep up with the quality that they need to bring onto the consoles. Now, if they wait 5, maybe 6, and maybe in the future we'll start seeing 10-year life cycles for consoles, then we're going to see much higher quality games, and even the graphics of those games would be at a much, much higher caliber. So now you know a little bit more about Sony, but what about their stock price? Where is the stock price actually headed to? What's a good figure that we can look and pay attention to? So the first thing I want to bring to you is the short-term chart. This could be a head and shoulders pattern forming if this goes straight back down, but that doesn't mean that it's just going to go bearish forever, right? But let's say it doesn't form a bearish pattern and it continues to go up and retest these levels, which obviously it has to retest 116, 118, and only after it retests and closes above 118 will it start to trend higher if it chooses to go there. But how high can it go? Well, in order to understand how high it's gonna go, we need to look at the long-term past chart. We saw earlier that we got as high as $150 back in the dot-com bubble, and since then it's never reached to those levels. So can it get there? Well, of course. And not only can it get there, but I think this time it actually deserves to be there. Back then, people were just hyped around the stock. And how do I know this? How do I actually know that it might be getting to these points again in the near future, whether it takes a year, 2, 3, 4 years? What points me into the direction that this valuation is actually reachable? Well, if you look at the volume, all these green and red bars down here, those are our volume. Look at how little of volume we had down here when it reached $150 per share. And yet, look at these back here when people were buying up so many shares when it was cheap. Even now, even though the price is higher and people are not trading or buying or selling the stock as much as they were here, that doesn't mean that people aren't holding the stock, and that's why the stock price is going up. The real big deal is the fact that they are having much more volume in this 110, 120 price levels that we're seeing right now. And that usually paints a really good sign for a stock to be consolidating in this area. And if it consolidates here and starts to trickle up higher and higher, well, we might retest the old previous highs of 150. And from there, as long as they continuously grow and dominate in the gaming sector, which a lot of their revenue comes from that sector alone, then we could see a possible 2x in the stock from today's levels. And that is obviously somewhere in the $220 range. Now, again, this is a very long-term graph, so this could take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, but it also depends heavily on how much people actually believe in the stock and the products that they bring to the table going forward. So let me know what you think about Sony stock. Let me know if you like this company for the long term like myself. I personally think that this is a much more safer play than some of the other speculative stocks that we talk about on the channel. This is something like a Nintendo company in my eyes, but also somewhat similar to maybe a Samsung or an Apple, but a much lower valuation because they do have an ecosystem that's very similar to those companies as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to smash the like button, and also YouTube thinks that you might enjoy these two videos as well. Peace out.